Encouragement. Actually, that last meme that we looked at talking about behind every successful man is a proud wife and a surprised mother-in-law, it's kind of a takeoff of a different quote. Something like this: behind every successful man is a woman called mom. And I've seen that in print in several different places. And it's a good reminder, strong, godly women raising strong, godly children to be examples and to serve and love the Lord. We see so many examples of that in the Scripture, don't we? Godly mothers raising godly children, and that's great examples for us. I think it was Spurgeon that said, never could it be possible for any one of us to estimate what he owes to a godly mother. And if you grew up in a Christian home and you had a mom that raised you that way, you echo those sentiments, and you'll rejoice in that. Thankful that God isn't tied just to that. There are many here today that didn't have that home, and yet God still saved them. And they can now start that lineage and start a godly home and raise their children that way. But one of the great examples, I think, of this paradigm is the story of Hannah and her son Samuel. And that's what I'd like us to look at here today from the book of 1 Samuel. Samuel began his ministry at a pretty crucial time in Israel's history. If you know anything about that history, the time of the judges was just coming to an end. They're moving into the days of the kings, and Samuel is kind of in that in-between section. But he ruled when the judges were there. He ruled at a time when it was spiritually turbulent, maybe we could say it that way. He brought them from the time of the judges to a time of revival, a time when every man did what was right in his own eyes, to a wonderful revival that we see in 1 Samuel chapter 7. He anointed the first king. He anointed the second king, David, probably the most famous king of Israel. That's the time period that we see Samuel growing up in and ruling. He was a great servant of God. There's no doubt about that. And yet, part of his greatness, much of his greatness, came from a mom who prayed for him and who was a godly example to him, especially in those early years. So today, I'd like to look for a little while at this godly mother by the name of Hannah. So we're in 1 Samuel chapter 1. Let's just read that first verse and we'll jump into this here. My outline's very simple today. We're going to take the narrative and just tell the story, and then at the end we're going to draw some applications and some lessons that we can learn from this biblical account. So it starts out here giving us the physical setting. It says, there was a certain man of Zophim of Mount Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. So how many of you got like lots of information out of that? You read that and said, I know exactly what he's talking about. I know these people. I know the location on the map. Yeah, me either. They lived in a place called Ramathaim Zophim. Ramath is probably a little more what we're familiar with. It's in the tribe of Ephraim, the hill country of Ephraim, which is pretty central when it comes to Israel. If you kind of were thinking of a map in your mind, north of Jerusalem, but kind of central part of the country, that's what they were living in. Hill country, a nice, pleasant area to live. Another city that's mentioned in this text is the city of Shiloh. And Shiloh at that point was the place where the tabernacle was. It was a place where God promised that he would meet with his children. And so that's where they would go for the feast days. They didn't go to Jerusalem, they went to Shiloh. And so that'll be mentioned, you'll see that come up. It's about 10 miles from where they lived in Ramath, in that area. So about a 10-mile trip. That lets us know from the physical perspective. But what about the spiritual setting? What's it like in Israel during this time spiritually? Well, I already mentioned it's the tail end of the times of the judges. And we know what the last verse of Judges says. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Physically, spiritually, they just kind of did their own thing. They would follow the law a little bit. They'd follow it when it was convenient. Sometimes they would merge things together. And some commentators think that when they went up to celebrate the feast, they would just kind of lump them all together. Let's just make one trip and get it all over with, and then we'll come back home. And that wasn't uncommon. There were times, even before this, where the law wasn't followed at all. And Shiloh was a pretty empty place. There'd be some people coming and offering sacrifices, but very few. But it was a spiritually turbulent time in the time of Israel. The tabernacle was set up. We'll see that here. The feasts, to some degree, were being honored, but pretty hit and miss as to how they did that. In fact, we could even see in this text, we're not going to look at it, but there were some wicked priests that were dishonoring the time of sacrifice and doing some horrible things there in the tabernacle. Hophni and Phinehas, you've read the story, you know what I'm talking about. And even what Eli assumes of Hannah here a little later on in the story tells us that there was some wickedness that was going on at this time. Bottom line was, it's a spiritual vacuum. There's no spiritual leader. There's no one that's leading and pushing Israel, directing them to do what is right. So as we move from the setting to the story, let's read verse 2 along with this verse 1. There was a certain man named Elkanah. He had 2 wives, verse 2. The name of the one was Hannah. The name of the other was Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now, we're going to be introduced here to what we're going to see as a dysfunctional family. Now, that'll come more clear as we get further into the story. But we see Elkanah as the husband. His name means possessed of God or created by God. He's got a good name. And I really think that Elkanah means well. I think he's trying to do what's right to the best of his ability in that culture that he's living in. As you dig a little deeper, you see that he was a Levite. You go to 1 Chronicles chapter 6, and we see that he's from the family of Kohath. So he's a Kohathite. And if you look at those families from Aaron and see what their responsibilities were, the family of Kohath was an honorable house within the tribe of Levi. And so as a Levite, he's living within the tribe of Ephraim. So that's why he's living there. He's a religious man. Look down in verse 3. This man went up out of his city yearly to worship, to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. So he's making attempts to lead his family in a good way. He's religious. He's honoring these holy days. So he's a religious man, but he's also somewhat of a conflicted man. What does it say next? It says in verse 2, he had 2 wives. Is that a good life choice in any scenario? No, it's not. And we could get into the dynamics there as far as how that works and why it works. I think a lot of it was taking ideas from pagan culture, and we're not going to delve into that necessarily. But the fact was he had 2 wives. And that led to some serious dysfunction within the home. Wife number 1 is named Hannah, and we're going to assume that he married her first. She's listed first in the story. I think it's very clear that he married her first. Her name means grace or gracious. And we'll see, I think, that she lives up to that as we tell the story a little bit further. But she appears to be the first wife. She was the favored wife. Look down in verse 5. It says, to Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah. We don't see that mentioned of the other wife, Peninnah. I'm not saying he didn't love her, but the fact that it's mentioned here indicates a favored status that he's giving to this first wife named Hannah. But there's a problem. What is the issue with Hannah? She's barren. It says it twice. She has no children. And then later in verse 5, she has no children. The Lord had shut up her womb. And I don't think in our country today we understand the significance of that. There are people today that are happy that they don't have children. They're just happy to live their lives where they can do exactly as they want. They can have all the freedom in the world. They don't have to deal with raising children. Children tie you down. They are an expense, and there's an obligation that comes with raising them. There's incredible joy that comes with raising a family as well. But they're kind of selfish. That mentality is prominent today. But it wasn't that way in the days of the nation of Israel. They wanted to have children. In fact, the family line was continued through their children, and they inherited the property, and it was a big deal. And so for Hannah to be barren was hard. I think it was viewed even as a curse, possibly even a curse from God. And that puts a little different take on her perspective and the emotional state that she's finding herself in here in this story. Well, that leads us to wife number 2. Her name is Peninnah. Her name means jewel or pearl, and where Hannah demonstrates her name well, I don't think Peninnah does a good job of that at all. Second wife, but she's able to have children. She's productive. And it says that she has children there early in verse 2. You go down to verse 4, and it talks about all her sons and all her daughters. Sons and daughters are both plural, so that means there's at least 2 of each. There's at least 4 children that she's had, likely more. She's able to have kids, and she's producing. And every time she has a kid, what does that do to Hannah? What is her emotional state? It's a struggle. And you would think that because Peninnah is having children, that this would be switched. But we find that Peninnah becomes jealous and vindictive. When we see the words used to describe her a little bit later in the story, you'll see what I mean. There's a mean streak to this lady. One would think Hannah would be jealous of her. But I think she's jealous of the favor that Elkanah is showing to Hannah. That's the dynamics that are developing here in this home. I wonder if possibly Elkanah married Peninnah, the second wife, because Hannah was not having children. Does that lead to the dynamics a little bit in the family as well? Can you see how that would affect Hannah? I wasn't good enough, and so now he had to take somebody else. And now they have a rivalry going between the two. Well, as we read on into the story a little bit further, we're going to see a day in the life. Scripture kind of opens up a door for us and allows us to see a little snapshot of what life is like behind the four walls, behind the doors of this family here in Ramath. And the snapshot that we're given is a time of celebration. It's a time of a party. Look down in verse 3. This man went up to his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord. Verse 4, when the time was that Elkanah offered, he gave to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and her daughters portions. But unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved her. We've read part of that. But what we don't really understand here is they're going up to offer this feast, to offer this sacrifice. It's a feast day. Likely this was a peace offering. And they would offer that. The sacrifice would be made. The priest would keep part of it. Then he would give the meat back to the family, and they would have a big banquet. They'd have a big party. They'd have a big celebration. And that's what's going on here at this time. It was supposed to be a time to rejoice as a family, a time to give thanks to God, a time to sit around the table and have laughter and joy and rejoicing, gratitude. All these things were part of this. That was the goal. That was the desire. I want you to think big family Thanksgiving dinner, big family Christmas dinner. All the aunts and uncles are around the table. All the cousins are around there as well. When I grew up in Colorado, we had my dad had a big family, and there were 3 other brothers that lived fairly close, and they had big families too. And so sometimes 4th of July, sometimes Thanksgiving, sometimes Christmas, all of those would be together. So there'd be 4 of the brothers, their wives, and all the kids. It'd be a huge group of people, and the house was hopping. And there's kids all over the place. We're building, we're playing, we're doing stuff. And then we all sit down to the big meal in separate rooms because there wasn't a table big enough. And man, we had great times. I look back on those times with great fondness. Now, it wasn't perfect. I mean, we had 4 Dobson men in that household, so there's going to be some arguing going on. And they talked about all kinds of stuff, and sometimes the voices would get raised, and the kids would just go outside. So it wasn't perfect. But you understand what I'm talking about. You can reflect on those types of meals and what the joy was at times like that. But for Hannah, it wasn't a time of joy. It wasn't a time that she looked forward to. This should have been something that she would just look forward to every year and be excited about, but for her it was a time of angst. I think she dreaded these times of family get-togethers. There are some commentators that think that Elkanah had actually split the 2 women up, and that one lived in one city and one lived in another city, and they only got together for these big times of family celebrations. I don't know that we can verify that, but it's an interesting idea. And it would show why she is so anxious about these get-togethers. So it says that there's some favoritism that's being shown here. Peninnah and her children are given portions, the end of verse 4. What does that mean? Well, as a sacrifice is given back to Elkanah, he would divide up the meat, and he would give portions to Peninnah and to each of her children. And then it says he gave a worthy portion to Hannah. And that word can either mean a double portion, or it can mean the choice portion. He gave either the most or the best to Hannah. And it was done obvious. I mean, it wasn't something that was like he snuck it over to her. I mean, it's done publicly. Everybody sees it. It's like he gave chuck roast to all the other kids over here, and he gave his wife the ribeye. Gave her the best cut. And that doesn't go over very well with Peninnah. And we see jealousy here displayed. Look down in verse 6. Her adversary also provoked her sore for to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. And as he did so year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, so she provoked her. Therefore she wept, and she would not eat. Boy, Hannah's barrenness was a sore spot, and Peninnah knew that. And she was just pouring salt in the wound. She was going to aggravate. She was going to make it worse. And the language that's used here is very, very descriptive. It says her adversary. Rival would be a good synonym. There was a rivalry here. It's one who distresses, one who causes trouble. The word provoke is used. That's not a kind word, right? It's the idea to vex or to poke or to dig. Have you ever been in a situation where somebody knew there was a sore spot and they just kept poking and poking and poking and poking? Why? Trying to get a reaction. They want to get the reaction out of you that they're trying to get. And she was pushing all the buttons. And it doesn't take a lot of imagination to think about maybe some of the things that she was saying during that time. You think your husband loves you, he gave you the better piece of steak, but I mean, obviously he loves me more because I've given him children. Hey, have you given him children? Just throws it out there, just flaunts it in front of her. They're sitting at the table, all of her kids are bustling around there, there's that chit chat, and over on her end of the table, there's none of that. Maybe she even makes it personal from a spiritual perspective. Obviously, God loves me more because he's blessed me with children. What does that say about you? There was some meanness going on here. You go on and it says she was trying to make her fret. And the word means to tremble or to fear or to be anxious. The root word there is the idea of thunder. And it gives us maybe a little bit of an idea of what kind of a personality Peninnah was. Was she loud? The idea is she thundered this against her. Loudly and obnoxiously would not let it rest. Just kept it up. As Elkanah doubled Hannah's portion, Peninnah doubled down on her verbal assault. Hey, great family dynamics. Doesn't that make you want to go to the party at their house? I mean, at that point, you're saying, let's talk about politics and religion just so that we can make ease the tension a little bit. It'd be tough. Well, and we see next, Hannah's emotions begin to overflow. Look at verse 7. As he did so year by year, Peninnah is provoking here, therefore she wept and did not eat. The emotions finally come out. For Hannah, these wounds go deep. They cut to the... She's trying to keep it all together. Can you put yourself in her place, ladies? You want it to be a celebration. You want it to be a happy time. That's what it's supposed to be. But you have all these feelings and all these emotions that are welling up, and you're having a hard time keeping them under the surface. They come up, and so you push them back down, but they come up again, and you push them back down. And then finally, Peninnah says that last thing, that last straw that breaks the camel's back. And the emotions can't be fought back anymore. She bursts into tears. She jumps up from the table, and she runs out of the room. And everybody that's left is just looking at each other in awkward silence. Can you feel the awkwardness? Except for Peninnah over there with that smug look on her face because she got exactly what she was trying to do. She poked just loud enough. It's a tough situation. It's hard for her at this point. Well, we see number 5, comfort attempted. Look at verse 8. Her husband, Elkanah, he loves her. He just is a little clumsy. Maybe that's the way to say it. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, why are you weeping? Why are you not eating? Why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? So he gets up from the table. I'll give him props at this point. He gets up from the table and he goes out trying to comfort her. Guys, have you ever been lost in that situation before? The emotions are there and you're like, okay, now what do I do? I don't know what to do at this point. They say that men are a lot like mascara. They tend to run at the first sign of emotion. There might be some truth there. But props to Elkanah, at least he tried. At least he made an attempt. And he went out and he started to talk with her. And guys, wouldn't it be nice if our wives came with a manual? I talked about that with the kids in Sunday school this morning as far as parents raising children. But man, it'd be nice if we had that. Of course, guys, be honest, it probably wouldn't do a lot of good because most of us don't like to read the manual anyway. That's a last resort to have to break down and read it. But I feel for Elkanah in this situation. He means well, but he's not much help. He really ends up being a good example of what not to do in this situation, aside from going out there and being with her. He asks these questions. Why are you crying? Why aren't you eating? Why is your heart so grieved? Well, the answer to those questions is obvious. Why even bring that up? And then he follows it with this kicker, right? So guys, hold on to this one, right? I mean, if you're taking notes, you make sure you get this line because this is incredible. Listen to the wisdom of this man as he's trying to console his wife. Am I not better to you than 10 sons? I mean, come on. I mean, I know you want children, but you've got me. Maybe he didn't say it quite like that, but that's kind of how it comes across, right? I don't think he's getting husband of the year for that line. I don't think that's how that's going to work. I don't know. It's a tough situation. I think in some senses, he's just increased her emotional turmoil. I think in some ways he's actually increased her level of guilt. Because she loves Elkanah. She knows he's trying. She knows that he can't do anything more than he's doing. And for him to say this out loud, you've got me, I'm doing the best I can. Now she feels guilty for feeling the way she's feeling with her husband that's trying. It just made things worse for her. Rather than trying to fix it or fix her, he'd been better off just to be with her and just to hold her in her tears. Just to direct her back to the Lord, who's the one that could fix the situation. And just be there and comfort her. He'd been better off if he'd have kept his mouth shut. And guys, sometimes that's a good lesson for us. Sometimes we're better off just not saying anything if we don't know what to say. But what if he just prayed with her? What if he just pointed her back to God? That would have been way better. I don't want to get stuck on that. Time's going fast. But we see now her anguish is expressed. Look down in verse 9. So the meal's done. Hannah rises up after they'd eaten. She doesn't eat. It says that earlier. But after they've eaten and drunk, Eli the priest sat upon a seat by the post of the temple of the Lord. And she was in bitterness of soul. And she prayed unto the Lord and wept sore. I think her husband finally either just walks away, goes back to the table, or she leaves him and just goes on to get some more alone time. And now she's there, and we see this prayer, a painful prayer from a broken heart. Bitterness of soul. These are expressive words. She wept and sobbed, probably uncontrollably. Out of the deep anguish of her heart, what does she do? What she should have done to start with. She cries out to God. He's the one that can help in this situation. And let me say this, one of the benefits of this kind of emotional pain, it's not comfortable, we don't like it. But one of the benefits of being in this type of a state is it drives us to our knees before God. It drives us to come to God, and sometimes I think that's why God allows it in our lives. That's what it did for Hannah, and that's what it needs to do for us. She finally let out all the pent-up frustration and hurt, and it just overflowed from her lips as the tears flowed from her eyes. She just tells God everything that's going on in her heart. We don't have the whole prayer recorded here. It went on for some time. I think like David, she just said some things out loud. God knows them anyway, and she gets it out of her system that way. But I think this is a turning point in the story. It's kind of rough up to this point, but we're going to see a turn from sorrow to joy. As she continues her prayer, she makes an oath, a vow to the Lord. In verse 11, it says, and she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thine handmaid a man-child, then will I give him unto the Lord all the days of his life. There shall no razor come upon his head. She makes a vow. She makes a commitment to God. God, if you'll remember me, God, if you will come, if you will give me a son, I will give him back to you. I'll give him back to you for the rest of his life. And it's not just a vow. You see that last phrase. This is a Nazirite vow. She's saying, I will dedicate this one. He will be separated unto you for the rest of his life. But while she's there praying, and as she's making this vow, her actions are misunderstood. In my notes I put, it's a ministerial misunderstanding. Sometimes as leaders, we can see a situation and not really see a situation, and we comment before we really should. And that's what happens to Eli here. He sees what she's doing. He sees her mouth moving, but no sound is coming out, and he makes an assumption. Let's pick up the story down here in verse 12. It says, it came to pass as she continued praying before the Lord that Eli marked her mouth. Now Hannah, she spoke in her heart only, her lips moved not. Only her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she had been drunken. And Eli said unto her, how long wilt thou be drunken? Put away thy wine from thee. He totally misreads the situation. He doesn't see grief, he sees drunkenness. And he chastises her for that. He makes this false accusation. It really is a sad commentary on what's going on in Israel at this time, that thought would even come to his mind. The thought is it's probably happening on a fairly regular basis. And he goes, here's another one of those women. And he makes that assumption. He chastises her. Imagine what that does to Hannah. She's already in turmoil. She probably is feeling that God has abandoned her. She's probably struggling with the fact that her nemesis has just been provoking her. She probably feels a little more guilty after trying to be comforted by her husband. And now she's being chastised, not just by the priest, but by who? The high priest. Doesn't anybody understand what I'm going through? And it's interesting, in the midst of this false accusation, I love her response. Look at the next verse. Verse 15, Hannah answered and said, no, my Lord. I'm a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but have poured out my soul, therefore, before the Lord. Don't count your handmaid for a daughter of Belial as a wicked person. For out of the abundance of my complaint and grief have I spoken hitherto. What a humble response. Just the grief and sorrow is coming out. She's genuine and she's authentic. And I think the genuineness of her response touches a chord in Eli's heart. Maybe it had been a while since he'd seen genuine and authentic worship, which is what she's articulating here. And we see some compassionate insight from this priest who's really not walking with God himself. But he joins her in asking God to answer the prayer. Then in verse 17, Eli answered and said, go in peace. The God of Israel grant thee the petition that thou hast asked of him. Wow. Go in peace. What wonderful words. Has she been experiencing peace at all up to this point? No, it's incredible turmoil. But here there's peace procured. Go in peace. May God grant you your request. And I think in that moment, Hannah understood that she'd been heard. She understood that God had heard her, and God's peace sweeps over her, and the vexation in her soul is gone. Like almost instantaneously. It's like God just took it away. And it showed both on her face and in her actions. It says that her countenance was no more sad. Oh, I'm sure her eyes were still a little red and puffy from crying. I'm sure there were still tear streaks going down her cheeks. But her countenance was no longer sad. She went back and sat down at the table, and she finished her meal. And the family is looking at her like, what happened to her? What happened to Hannah? What happened to her is that she had been heard by God. Folks, where does peace come from? In situations like this, peace comes from taking our burdens to the Lord and staying there until we know for sure we've been heard. And that's exactly what did. God responds to the prayer that flows from a heart that's broken and sincere. As we continue on in the story, we see the prayer answered. I'm going to speed up here just a little bit. We see the prayer has been answered. Look down at verse 19. They rose up in the morning early and they worshiped. It's a great thought. Park on that a little bit on your own. Before the Lord, they returned, came to their house to Ramah, and Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. Wherefore it came to pass, when the time was come about, after Hannah had conceived, that she bare a son. Hannah goes home. I wonder what their conversation was like on the way home. I think that she shared with Elkanah what had happened there with the priest, that whole story, how she was convinced that God had heard her, and she was a different person as they were working their way home. But the Lord remembered her. That's a great line too. Hannah conceives. 9 months later, she has this baby boy. She names him Samuel. The idea that God has, means asked of God. Every time she says his name, she's remembering the promise that she made. She's remembering God's answer. What a wonderful thought. Do you think that maybe she loved on that little boy those first 3 years? Yeah. I can't imagine what that must have been like for her. Taking time to teach him about God, preparing him to serve God, probably telling him about the vow and what his life was going to be like as he served the Lord for the rest of his life. But now we come to the time where this promise, this vow has to be fulfilled. This is going to be tough for Hannah. Imagine what that must have been like for her. Look down at verse 24. It says, and when she had weaned him and took him with her, she took him with her, 3 bullocks, 1 ephah of flour, a bottle of wine, and brought him unto the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. And they slew a bullock and brought the child to Eli. So now we see them going with another sacrifice, but going with an entirely different purpose. The time has come to honor her vow. Do you think she's having some mixed emotions? Probably a little bit. But she follows through. This integrity of Hannah comes through loud and clear right here. So they offer a sacrifice and they present this little boy to Eli, the high priest. And in doing so, she recalls the story. Remember, this is years that have passed. Eli has seen hundreds of people come through the tabernacle. Who knows how many people he's interacted with. And so she reminds him of the story. Look down at verse 26. O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, I am that woman that stood by thee here praying unto the Lord. Hey, do you remember that time several years ago? I was here praying. You thought I was drunk, but I was just in grief. You joined me in prayer. Well, guess what? God has answered my prayer. So she recalls the story and then she remembers her vow. For this son I prayed, and God has given me my petition. And so I have lent him, I've given him back to the Lord for as long as he lives. I think Eli was in shock. The fact that God answered that prayer possibly being one thing, but that she followed through with her vow. And now he's got this young man, this little boy there to help raise and to help shape and to serve together there in the tabernacle. And we see there's praises offered. I got to keep moving here. Look down at the end of verse 28. He'll be led to the Lord, and that last phrase, and they worshiped the Lord there. And that springs naturally into this prayer of praise that we see starting in chapter 2. They worshiped. Think about this. This is the same venue. This is the same people, but it's entirely different circumstances. It's entirely different emotions. It's an entirely different prayer. Look how she starts. And Hannah prayed and said, my heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth is enlarged over my enemies because I rejoice in thy salvation. The joy and the praise is just coming forth from this prayer. What a beautiful picture. From sorrow to rejoicing, we see a prayer of praise and worship. Well, you know the rest of the story. Samuel is left there. He stays to minister before the Lord. Down in 18 and 19, it talks about the fact that Hannah would come back every year. She'd make a little coat and she'd bring it back and present it to him so he had something to wear, a new coat, as he was outgrowing the old one. I don't know that it's a stretch. We don't see it in the passage, but I don't think it's a stretch to think that Hannah may have made other trips up to visit. I mean, they're 10 miles apart. I can't imagine her not coming up at other times just to interact, maybe on his birthday, those other special days. I think that probably happened. But specifically, at that yearly anniversary for the sacrifice, she'd come and she'd bring him a coat, and they'd have that time of reminiscence. But I want us to see one more thing here in the story before we get to the lessons, and that is divine blessing from God. Look down at verse 20 of chapter 2. I got ahead of myself here a little bit. And it says, and Eli blessed Elkanah his wife and said, the Lord give thee seed of this woman for the loan which is lent to the Lord. And they went to their home. And the Lord visited Hannah so that she conceived and bare 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the child Samuel grew before the Lord. She honored this vow to God. She gave back this son that God gave her. And what did God do in return? He repaid her 5-fold. That's a great thought. Folks, if God asks us to give to Him, He doesn't do that without repaying us in abundance for the gift that we've given back to Him. And that's a great thought as we end this story. I love positive endings. This dysfunctional family comes around and we see a really cool ending to this story. As Samuel now, he begins to be trained and he goes on to serve the Lord with his life. Let's draw a few lessons from this narrative in the time that we have left here this morning. The first one is this. Hannah stands as a great role model for mothers today. Her character is good. Now, we don't have the whole story. She's not perfect. I know there were times that she struggled with her attitude and probably the things that she said. But look at what we do see. She was gracious in spirit. She lived up to her namesake. We see this constant ridicule by Peninnah, and yet not one recorded harsh word in return. Is she brokenhearted? Absolutely. But she didn't lower herself to return the insult. That's a great reminder for us. Secondly, she was persistent in prayer. She prayed year after year. How long did this go on? Well, how many kids does Peninnah have? This went on for some time that she's struggling with it. And I know she's praying during that time. But she didn't stop until she was sure that she had met God on the matter. She didn't give up these times of prayer. She prayed until the answer came. In times of pain and sorrow, she poured out her soul to the only one who could understand. And she used her affliction not as an excuse for bitterness, but as a motivation for prayer. And that's a great reminder for us. Her sorrow drove her to her knees before God. I trust it'll do the same for us. We see patience with her husband's somewhat clumsy attempts at consolation. We see her humility in the face of Eli's accusations. We see faith after she prays and knows she's been heard by God. Her countenance changes, her actions change, her reactions change. She goes out knowing that God's going to give her prayer. That's faith. Great example. We see integrity. She vowed a vow and then she fulfilled it, even though I'm sure it wasn't easy for her to do. And that's just a small cross-section of the character traits that we see here from the life of Hannah, a solid role model. I wanted to have applications for each of us here today, not just for the ladies. Men, let's talk to us here for just a little bit. We are responsible for the spiritual and emotional dynamics within the home. God has put us in that position, and it's important that we understand that. In some ways, Elkanah did a pretty good job here. On the spiritual side, he was trying to lead his family to love the Lord. He led his family in worship. He took them to Shiloh for the sacrifice and feast. He was concerned with the spiritual dynamics in his home, and I'm thankful for that. But in some other ways, he seemed rather oblivious to the obvious tensions that were going on in the household. Maybe he just spent a lot more time in the field so he didn't have to deal with the drama that was happening at home. I don't know. But he did not step up in that situation like he should have. He should have said some things there at the table when all this was going on. He should have stepped up at that point, and he didn't do it. He seemed a little bit clueless on how to encourage his wife in her sorrow and in her grief. And I think we all struggle with that sometimes, guys. It's not our nature. We're not wired the same way that our wives are. And that's good, because that's how we can help them in that time. But in 1 Peter describes for us, he tells us that we should live with our wives according to knowledge. And if he gives us that command, that means it's possible. That means that we can do it. God doesn't give us commands that we are unable to keep. And so I would encourage you to go back and review the notes from 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7. that message on what it looks like to be a Spirit-filled husband. And just a quick reminder, those bullet points. Go back and read the verse. We're to live with her. Live with your wife, the mother of your children. This involves time. And there's no substitute for time. And that's been probably one of the hardest things that I'm struggling with through the last couple of years. And I mentioned that to the kids this morning. There is no end to stuff that needs to be done. I empathize with you guys that have your own businesses, because there is no way you're going to check off everything off your list. There's always one more thing to do. And I struggle with that when I come to the office. There's always one more thing to do. But at some point, I've got to leave those things, and I've got to be there to spend time with my wife. And so I understand that struggle. I've got to live with her. It involves time. I need to learn about her. This involves thoughtfulness. I need to love her. That involves tenderness. I need to lead her. This involves my testimony, my example before her and the children. And how do I do all this? Well, I've got to look back and trace the template given to me by Jesus Christ. And I follow his example. And we talked about that there in 1 Peter chapter 3. So men, let me encourage you to be a godly leader in your home. Set the spiritual and the emotional temperature in that home. Yes, take your wife out today for Mother's Day. Yes, buy the chocolate, the flowers, do those things. But the best gift you can give your wife and the mother of your children is to be a godly leader in the home. That will mean more to her than any of those other things that just kind of pass by the wayside. That is something that will last. Kids, it's your turn. You're thinking, well, wait a second. You didn't talk about kids at all in this story. Well, we mentioned Samuel, but he was pretty young. So how am I going to get an application out of this? Well, I think there's one here. Young people, show honor and respect to your mom and your dad through your obedience to them and your submission to God. Simple to say, hard to practice. I know we don't see a lot about Samuel here. He's pretty young in the story. But did you ever stop to think that Samuel didn't have any say in this decision? That thought crossed my mind the other day. Mom made the vow. It affected Samuel. He didn't have anything to do with this. He didn't have any say in the matter at all. But even though he didn't make the agreement, guess what? He honored it. And in so doing, he honored his mom in that process. And that was a remarkable thought for me. You know, when he was young, he didn't have a lot of choice. But as he got older, he could have gone a whole different direction. He didn't have to stay there working under Eli. He could have just drifted off and said, hey, I've had enough of this. I'm tired of cleaning up after these sacrifices. I don't want to do this anymore. But he didn't. He stuck it out. He stuck with what he was told to do. And that to me was a great reminder. You know, teenagers and young people, there are a lot of things that are outside of your control. Have you noticed that? Do you sometimes chafe against that a little bit? I think the older we get as teenagers, the more we might struggle with that a little bit. But there's things outside your control. You didn't choose your parents. Well, I'll help you out a little bit here. They didn't exactly choose you either. I mean, they may not chose to have you, but they didn't know what they were getting. So that goes both ways, okay? Let's be honest about that. You didn't choose your parents. You didn't choose your family dynamics, whatever those dynamics are like. That wasn't your choice. You were born into that. You didn't make those choices. You didn't choose where you're living. You didn't choose how you're going to school. You didn't have a choice in any of those things. And we can go a little deeper than that. You didn't choose your height. You didn't choose your looks, your personality, the freckles that splash across your nose or not, your quirks. Those things were built into you by God himself. You didn't have a lot of choice in these things. They were decided by God and decided by your parents. My question is, like Samuel, are you willing to accept these things and take them as gifts from a good God? Or are you going to push against it and fight against it and say, I'm going to do this until I'm old enough, then I'm out of here. Once I turn 18, I'll be an adult and I can do what I want. That's not the attitude that Samuel had here. And I think Samuel has an attitude that we should emulate. You know, the answer to that question, whether you will accept them or fight against them, will ultimately determine the peace that's in your heart. It'll determine the harmony that's in your home. And it'll ultimately determine the trajectory of your life. It's crucial to come to terms with some of these things while you are still young and in the home. And I'll just end it with this. When you come to areas in your life that you don't have control, guess what? You can trust implicitly in the one who is in control. And if you'll learn that lesson now at this age, it'll stand you well through the rest of your life. Just like I think it did for Samuel. A great reminder for us. Let me give you one more application, and with this we'll close. God is in the business of healing hurts and bringing good from hard circumstances. We see that in this story. Man, there's a lot of dysfunction in this family. Quite frankly, Elkanah made a mess of things in taking 2 wives. But I'm thankful that God doesn't edit the ugly out of these historical accounts. He could have done that. He could have made it all look perfect and rosy and just told us the part of the story that sounded better, that was a little bit more scripted, a little more Christian-y. He could have just done that. But he doesn't edit those things out, and I'm thankful that he doesn't do that. Sometimes I think we get the idea that God can only use the perfect, the neat and the tidy, and if somehow we've failed or made a mess of things in our life, that it's the end of it, and God can't use us anymore. And that's not true. God still uses broken and flawed people, and I'm thankful for that. Otherwise, he couldn't use me. And it's a great reminder when we come to this story. It stands as a reminder that God can still use broken and sinful people. It's a reminder that our failures are not final as long as God's grace is operable. And as I've checked, God's grace isn't running out anytime soon. God is still on the throne, and he's still giving grace. And God can still pick up the pieces of our lives, the broken pieces, and he can still make something beautiful. But we've got to stop trying to do it on our own. We've got to let him do it. We've got to come to him in genuine brokenness. Like we see of David in Psalm 51, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart. O God, thou wilt not despise. God responds to the prayer that flows from a broken heart, a heart that's broken and sincere. He did for Hannah, and he'll do the same for us. So don't think because maybe you've made some mistakes in this life that it's all over. No. God is gracious. God is forgiving. Now, there may be some consequences. That's part of life. We can't make choices without consequences. But God is still in the business of putting those lives back together and using us in ways that we couldn't even imagine. He did that here in this story with Hannah and Elkanah and Samuel. Oh, friends, let's tie it back to that little series in 1 Peter that we're going to be jumping into again. Let's have a short time mentality. We don't know how much time is left. I've been thinking about that this week as well, and my heart goes out for Aaron and Rebecca. I didn't mention them by name last week, but I can now that they've told the rest of their family members. Aaron's one of my best friends in ministry. And his wife Rebecca has been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Late stage 3, likely stage 4. We don't know if it's in her lungs yet. The CT scan hasn't come back yet. They got 4 kids. Those kids are probably wondering today, is this my last Mother's Day with Mom? They're struggling through that, and my heart goes out to them. But I'm not going to turn this and guilt trip you guys. I don't think that's important. This could be your last Mother's Day. I'm not going to go down that road. But I am going to say it this way. You do have this Mother's Day. You have today. We're not promised tomorrow. None of us are. But you have today. How are you going to make today count? How are you going to take the applications from what we just saw here in 1 Samuel and allow God to change you and use you so that you're better fit for his service? That's my question I'm leaving you with today. What a beautiful story we see here. Some ugliness, absolutely. But God turning ugliness into beauty and bringing up a son that's going to lead the nation of Israel and bring them back to him, all because of a godly woman by the name of Hannah. Father, I thank you.